I want to welcome everyone to our latest edition of our American Sacred Text series. I'm Rabbi Kaplan Mandel, and after my colleagues have discussed such texts as President Johnson's inaugural address and Frederick Douglass's text, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, I am honored to be talking with you today about my submission for this series, the Declaration of Sentiments, written as part of the Seneca Falls Convention in upstate New York in 1848. It is a document that, as you see on your screen, was called no less great, noble, and important than the first honorable Declaration of Independence by Ernestine Rose, whom you will come to know as the most prominent Jewish female voice of this period. And it is also a document derided and called amusing by newspapers like the New York Herald. It felt particularly timely to be talking about this document and talking about women's rights and gender equality at this very moment. Some of you attended our event last week, the film screening of Under God and the discussion of the Equal Rights Amendment, first introduced as legislation by Alice Paul 100 years ago and up for voter approval in New York State this November. I'll also note that some of you came with me and the adult engagement team to see the Broadway musical Suffs several months ago. Suffs traces the story of Alice Paul, who was picking up the torch from a previous generation of activists. And of course, the possibility of our first female president takes us back even further in time to 1872, when Victoria Woodhull, one of America's first female stockbrokers and newspaper publishers, was the first to run for our highest office. So yes, it is a ripe time to be talking about a pivotal, and I would argue sacred, moment in American history. So let's really rewind and consider what was happening in America after the original Declaration of Independence was signed. And incidentally, all of these background tidbits that I share with you are going to be, I think, tantalizing and could be their own lectures and programs in and of themselves. So apologies in advance for maybe raising more questions than answers, but I just want to give you a bit of color for all that's going on. So some of you know that Abigail Adams wrote letters to her husband, the Declaration of Independence signer and future second president, John Adams of Massachusetts. Clearly, suffrage was on her mind as the new country was being created. Let's look at her words. She says, "I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and we will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." So Abigail Adams certainly was a prophet in anticipating that inequality was not going to be the permanent state. A fact I never knew, apparently the New Jersey Constitution, the state constitution, gave women the vote in 1776, maybe by accident of not specifying particular pronouns or using particular nouns. Maybe it was intentional. There's a whole scholarly rabbit hole you could go down. But in 1807, that language was revised to exclude women. It was only for property holding men. And as we're understanding what was considered proper versus improper in society, there was considerable objection in mainstream circles to have women even speak in public. Women who did so were interrupted often by calls of being accused of being a witch or a she-devil. There was a set of New England ministers who wrote a public letter saying that giving speeches would cause women, quote, not only cease to bear fruit, but also to fall in shame and dishonor into the dust. So this was a time of what was known as Republican motherhood, where the best thing women could do for the young country patriotically was to rear virtuous children. Now, the irony was that the more women were seen as educators of their children, and the more educated they became, the more politically and socially engaged they became, which ultimately fueled the revolution that we're going to be talking more about. A notable example, some of you are familiar with Mount Holyoke College, which was founded by Mary Lyon as the Mount Holyoke Female Seminary in 1837. It was the first college to offer women a curriculum on par with men's college programs at the time. Meanwhile, South Carolina sisters Sarah and Angelina Grimke were among the first to openly advocate for women's suffrage. You might argue for property rights, since married women did not often have the right to own property. It became their husbands upon marriage. But voting, that was considered the third rail and considered extremely, extremely controversial. In terms of various people we should keep in mind during this period, like the Grimke sisters, many of the leaders of the women's rights movement actually got their start in the anti-slavery movement. And many had a serious relationship with their own faith tradition. Lucretia Mott, for example, was drawn to abolitionism due to her Quaker beliefs that all people are equals. And yet, ironically, when she was selected as a delegate to the World's Anti-Slavery Convention in 1840 in London, she found that these anti-slavery factions were opposed to public speaking and action by women. And in fact, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who met her husband at a radical abolitionist meeting, attended that same conference, and Elizabeth witnessed Lucretia Mott and others being rejected as delegates. That was one of the seeds planted that ultimately led them to join together to create Seneca Falls, which we'll get into in a moment. Now, Elizabeth Cady Stanton is very interesting because she came to believe that Christianity needed to be reinterpreted. Here's a quote from her. "I know of no other books that so fully teach the subjection and degradation of woman. When our bishops, archbishops, and ordained clergymen stand up in their pupils and read selections from the Pentateuch with reverential voice, they make the women of their congregation believe that there really is some divine authority for their subjection." She was so convinced that progress on women's rights required a revised Christianity that Elizabeth Cady Stanton assembled ultimately an international committee to reinterpret the Bible's message. And you can investigate her Woman's Bible, which was written in the 1890s. Now, her partner in crime in many ways was Susan B. Anthony, who was much more of a big tenter. She was much less likely to criticize organized religion. In fact, here's a quote from Susan B. Anthony. She said, "I have worked 40 years to make the suffrage platform broad enough for atheists and agnostics to stand upon. And now, if need be, I will fight the next 40 years to keep it Catholic enough to permit the straightest Orthodox religionist to speak or pray and count her beads upon." So some of these leaders were more on the fringes when it came to religious beliefs, and some were trying to hold it together. Another person who certainly evoked religion as part of her advocacy was Sojourner Truth, who had run away from her slave master and became very involved in the anti-slavery movement and the women's rights movement. She spoke at the 1851 Women's Rights Convention held in Akron, Ohio, and delivered the famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech that is certainly also considered an American sacred text. I wanted to play you just a brief clip of that speech. Let's see if we can hear it. Moment.
The scientists and engineers that support the next mission to Mars could be in this class.
Okay, let's see. Here we go.
when that little man in black there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do it. The men better let them.
So you can see how women are using different teachings in a variety of ways to attempt to upend patriarchal
Obliged to you.
Incidentally, historians have examined the arguments of Elizabeth Cady Stanton in particular. When she said women, it seems that she particularly had in mind women much like herself, white, middle class, culturally, if not religiously Protestant, propertied, well-educated. And I recommend this podcast, Amended, which helps to complicate our notions of the history of the women's rights movement, if you want to learn more about some of these figures. All right, we're going to keep going. There were a lot of ideological movements happening during this period that were swirling and sometimes clashing. So you can see there, women's rights alongside abolitionism, alongside the free thinker movement, alongside those who saw the Bible as authority, some who did not, and alongside some nativist, racist, and xenophobic ideas. Some who are drawing on the Bible as an authority to inform their abolitionism are alongside those who reject the Bible altogether and are known as free thinkers. And some of those free thinkers didn't support abolition because they felt that the most crucial justification for abolition came from the Bible. So they rejected that. Ernestine Rose, who I'm going to be talking about more in a moment, insisted that free thinkers had to support universal mental liberty and therefore saw themselves on the side of abolition. So lots of different ideologies that sometimes connected with one another. Those who were supporting anti-slavery work also saw themselves easily involved in women's rights issues, seeing equality as equality, and other times seeing them in competition or contradiction to one another. A person that I learned about in my preparation for this conversation is Ernestine Rose, someone who I think in many ways has been erased from our history books, but someone I want to lift up as a Jewish voice in this conversation. Ernestine Rose was the only child of a Polish rabbi, and she questioned her tradition from an early age. And one could argue that her feminism actually came as a reaction to Judaism rather than inspired by Judaism. None of the restrictions applied to women ever made sense to her, and she became an atheist. There's so much to say about her. Her father, kind of in a Yentl style, treated her like a surrogate son. But when she started asking questions, her father said little girls must not ask questions, which fundamentally maddened her as an answer. This was back in Poland. She ended up testing the laws because her father told her it was forbidden to brush her hair because if any of the on Shabbat, because if any of the strands came out, then that would be considered work and therefore she would be condemned. But when she tested certain Torah laws and nothing happened, she broke with her belief in the Bible and the religion of her father. Now, her mother died, leaving her a large inheritance, but her father had chosen a fiancé for her. And the engagement contract said that if Ernestine did not follow through, the fiancé would keep the bulk of her legacy. So at the age of 17, Ernestine Rose went to a Polish court to plead her own case, and she won. And she led a very fascinating life. She got involved in the free thinkers movement. She was heavily influenced by the industrialist turned socialist Robert Owen, who some of you may have heard of. She came to the United States in 1836, and by the age of 41, she was the featured speaker at the Second National Women's Rights Convention in 1851 to over 1,000 people. And that's triple the number of people who attended the Seneca Falls Convention. So she was a very big deal. I think she may have been erased from history for being an immigrant, for being a radical, for being an atheist, but I highly recommend this book about her, The Rabbi's Atheist Daughter. It's excellent, and it really shows just how brilliant she was and how influential she was in her time. Here are just two quotes that I found that she offered that just gives you a little color into her intellect and her wit. So she said, "For is a woman not included in that phrase, all men are created free and equal? And if she is, what right has man to deprive her of her natural and inalienable rights? If woman alike human with man, or is she not?" Or that should be, "Is woman alike a human with man, or is she not? Choose your alternative. If she is not the same, then how can man rightfully legislate for a being entirely different than himself?" She also had interacted with a member of parliament when she lived in England, and he said that he could not support suffrage because he needed his wife to provide the perfect, soothing, gentle peace which a mind sullied by politics cannot feel. And she replied, saying that his happiness must be balanced on the very verge of a precipice, when the simple act of depositing a vote by the hand of a woman would overthrow and destroy it forever. So she had a very sharp wit and told people exactly what she thought. Meanwhile, Reform Judaism in America, imported from Germany, drew on the rationalism of the era and revised Orthodox practices to help Judaism enter the modern era. Now, in Germany in the 1840s, there was a conference in Breslau that said women should be entitled to the same rights and duties as men. And as you can see on the slide, in 1846, Max Lilienthal of New York City hosted confirmations in his synagogue with young women. In 1851, we see that mixed seating was introduced by Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise in Albany, and his prayer book, Minhag America, described the minyan as 10 adults, males or females, by 1857. This is all at about the same time as Seneca Falls. So at least in some pockets of Reform Judaism, the ground for equality was being laid. Unfortunately, let's be very clear that there was much more ideology than reality. It wasn't until 1922 that the Reform Rabbinical Association passed a resolution that women could not be justly denied the privilege of rabbinic ordination. And it was not until 50 years after that, in 1972, when women actually gained entrance into the rabbinate with Rabbi Sally Prasad. So we can see some ideology here and some moves that did make a difference in terms of men and women being treated equally. Notably with the mixed seating, it was known as family seating in the 1850s, for families to sit together rather than separated, which perhaps fit in with the ethos of the importance of family as opposed to emphasizing women's rights. It was perhaps a workaround. Okay, so now we get to Seneca Falls. So all of that was backstory of what was going on in America, what was going on in Judaism. So now we get to July 9th, 1848, where 5 reform-minded women, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton, met at a social gathering near Seneca Falls in a town called Waterloo, New York, and decided right then and there to hold a convention 2 weeks later. A convention was a very common way to promote change in the 1840s. They published a call in the local newspaper inviting people to a convention to discuss the social, civil, and religious rights and conditions of women. So this was not very well advertised. It was in a local newspaper. It wasn't like nationally announced. And as I said, it happened 2 weeks later, so it was not done with a lot of notice. It happened in the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls, which is about 3 miles east of Waterloo. And it was mostly relying on pre-existing networks of people who knew each other. Reformers, relatives, friends. It drew about 300 people. And ultimately, by the end, 100 women and men added their signatures to the Declaration of Sentiments, which we are going to take a look at next. Incidentally, after the declaration was announced, I shared with you that there were a wide range of responses to the declaration, from real praise to real derision from the popular press. In some ways, one could consider Seneca Falls to be a small event, and certainly there are many different seeds for launching the women's rights movement. But in the decades after the Seneca Falls Convention, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton are credited with creating a whole mythology and history around this moment being the moment of the birthplace of suffrage. So one other note, I want to indicate that using the Declaration and turning it on its head in a way is a long-standing tradition in America. You remember that Ernestine Rose was a devotee of Robert Owen. I mentioned the socialist, who ended up establishing utopian communities in America, including New Harmony, Indiana. And he referenced the Declaration on the 50th anniversary of its signing by saying, we meet to commemorate the period when the inhabitants of this new world attain the power to withdraw themselves from the control of the old world. This event is likely to prove as important as any which has occurred, etc., etc. The revolution, as secured by the Declaration of Independence, gave to people advancing towards civilization the first opportunity of establishing a government to permit them to acquire that greatest of blessings, mental liberty. And that was a very important idea for him. So he's using the Declaration as a proof text to advance his own cause in 1826. And in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, every school child was taught to memorize the Declaration of Independence. So everyone knew the words, everyone knew the rhythm, the cadence. It would have been a very deeply familiar text to them. So when we look at the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments and we see that the language of the Declaration of Independence is very much borrowed, it will definitely stop everyone who's listening in their tracks of, wait a second, this sounds so familiar and yet it's so different at the same point. And that creates potentially the dissonance to provoke the question of whether or not the original language of the Declaration is in fact either inclusive or being enacted as intended. So as we prepare to take a look at the document itself, I want to invite everyone to pay attention to particular phrases or concepts that strike you as potentially sacred, and why. Perhaps you find particular power in the deliberate use of the Declaration. I'd be curious after we read to get your thoughts about that. And you'll notice in the Declaration of Sentiments, just like the Declaration of Independence, there are a series of grievances that are articulated after the initial statements. And I'll be curious to you which of the grievances jump out to you, either because they feel relevant still or because they are surprising. So get out a piece of paper just to jot down a phrase or two that just strikes you as interesting, provocative, something that you want to comment on. And we're going to take a look at the text now together. Incidentally, I did receive this picture from one of our neighbors, our Central Synagogue neighbors, who recently went to Seneca Falls. And there is this plaque outside of the meeting house. It's the official National Park Service plaque. And it reveals that the actual text of the Declaration has not been well taken care of, which makes it even more important that we lift up these words today. So here we go. The Declaration of Sentiments. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one portion of the family of man to assume among the people of the earth a position different from that which they have hitherto occupied, but one to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that impel them to such a course. Now, I've listed on the right-hand side the language from the Declaration of Independence so that you can compare and contrast the language. It's very similar, but given the argument being made in this document, of course, there are differences, and you might notice that, of course, in this case, the signers of the Declaration of Sentiments are not proposing to break from the United States, but have a different charge than the founders of America, of course, and yet they've chosen to use the similar language. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves, by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of the women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled. I actually want to pause here and maybe take the first round of comments, reactions from all of you with me. Is there a particular element of this first section of the Declaration of Sentiments? We haven't gotten to the grievances yet, but that strike you as particularly noteworthy, particularly sacred, particularly surprising, particularly Jewish? I want to find out what is on your mind. So let's use the raised hand feature and see what strikes you as particularly notable in this first section of the Declaration. Who'd like to start us off? Ed Saslock, come on down. Just got to get you off of mute. Great.
Okay. So it strikes me that this is the most significant difference between this and the Declaration of Independence is that we're not arguing against single monarch and his government, but of a societal issue that transcends simply the government. It's broader and aimed at the entire the whole country, all of the people within it, and that's a major. I mean, you pointed out obviously that this is not a preface to a revolution where we separate fully from the existing government, but in another way, this is much broader.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Paula, please.
As a follow-up to that, I was thinking the same thing, that it's a much harder case to make when you're not making it against a clear person who has the capacity to change it. So when you're talking to the king who has all the power in the world and you make this declaration, the king is clearly a person that can actually receive this or change it or do something for it. But it's very unclear who this is directed to and therefore how it can be cured. And, when it goes a little bit into the next part where the Declaration of Independence is talking specifically to King George, and it's he has done all these wrongs. But when they use that same format, it's who is he? The whole thing just strikes me as very hopeless is too strong a word, but until you have a clear interlocutor that can help you correct this, it feels very frustratingly amusing, to quote somebody.
Paula, I appreciate that both of you, it strikes me in some ways this document is serving a very different purpose than the Declaration. The Declaration was in many ways a precursor to war, to actual military war. The war was already unfolding, but this was kind of like the acknowledgement of like, we are using military force. This, to me, what we're saying actually makes an even stronger case that this is a sacred document. This is a document of morality. This is a document that is emphasizing a hypocrisy that they are attempting to reveal to all who are willing to listen, that there is a mismatch between what we say we believe and what we're actually doing. The theory of change, the political savvy of like, okay, so here's our plan. I mean, did they have a plan? I mean, they decided to have this convention 2 weeks before they wrote this document. This is not a quote unquote strategic document. This is a document that is attempting to be in some ways educational, one might say. I'm curious what other people are thinking. Ron and Freddie?
Well, going along with your idea of the morality, I think the words in the last part of that first paragraph, where they say it's become our absolute duty and our necessity to make these changes and to demand it, I think all goes to their mindset of how important this was and the power that this should hold.
Yes, absolutely. And clearly it's so deliberate to use the Declaration as the way to harness that power. Yeah. Rosemary.
I think it's very clear who this is directed. Let me just preface this. I teach this stuff for a living, so
Fabulous.
I'm passionate about it. But in fact, I'm doing this tonight in my class. But it's directed at men. It's directed at a patriarchal system that seeks to control everything women do. And I had put in the chat this documentary, Ken Burns documentary, Not for Ourselves Alone. And there's a story in there, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she's my idol, by the way, who says when she was 11, her father was an attorney and a judge. And this woman, Mrs. Flowers, came to see her father because her husband had died and left a farm. And because there were no property rights for married women, the farm went to her son. And her son and his wife didn't want her on the farm. So they were throwing her out and she had no place to go. And when Elizabeth Cady Stanton heard this, she said to Mrs. Flowers as she was leaving, "That's okay, I'll fix everything. I'll tear those pages out of my father's law books and everything will be okay. And in my mind, that's exactly what she went on to do later in her life, tear those pages out. And I'm going to put in another commercial here. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's The Solitude of Self, everybody should read. She puts out her reasons for why women need to be educated. They need to have legal rights. Because basically we're in this alone. We're in life alone. You got to read it. I made my students read it. We're talking about it tonight. I'm sorry.
Amazing. Thanks, Rosemary. Beautiful, beautiful. Jill Gross, hello.
Hi. So first, I just wanted to say that I think the title alone tells us that this is different from the Declaration of Independence. It's Declaration of Sentiments. So it's not really putting forth a plan of action. It's stating, this is how we feel. And as you pointed out, it was done with not much notice and, 2 weeks. I mean, basically, this is not a plan of action. It's just letting the world know we feel we're being undervalued in all these ways, and we're going to be doing something about it. We don't know what yet, but we're going to be doing something.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that women's voices were so highly regulated, the fact that, a woman engaged in public speaking was a horror. The fact that these women are writing down their opinions and putting them out, broadcasting them for the world, that itself is a revolutionary act.
Right, right.
Just doing so. Alan, please. We'll hear from Alan, then we'll hear from Rona, and then I am going to share I don't want to leave you all in suspense. We need to hear the rest of the sentiments. Alan's having a little bit of trouble. No problem. There you go, Alan.
Got it. All right. Hi. Sorry about that, Rabbi. So I you asked about a Jewish connection. So what goes through my mind is the following. The formation of the Reformed Judaism is rooted in the Enlightenment after the French Revolution and the rights that got in the hands of the Europeans. And so, as we mentioned, Rabbi Isaac Meyer Wise of Albany, my hometown, I'll put a plug in for my hometown, this mixed seeding is in that same period of the 1850s or 1848, just before the formation of the Reform movement was founded with the UHC HUC, I would say, in 1873. So this same period has a Jewish sense to me because of the dynamics that are going on in Judaism that is leading to the egalitarian approach to Judaism that incorporates the role of women.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Rona, please. We got to get you off of mute. Let's see if we can do that. I'm going to try one more time, Rona. Let's see if we can make it happen. Otherwise, I promise to come back to you. Or you can. Oh, there, yes, success.
Okay. I don't have a whole lot to say, but thank you so much for doing this today. And gosh, all of you folks are so smart. And I don't want to use the word smart, but you definitely know much more than I do about this. And I have a reading impairment, so it's a little difficult for me just in terms of the reading, but I am loving listening to all of you today. I want to just mention one thing, and I don't know where it was written, if it was in the Declaration itself or one of your slides. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Yeah.
And the words are mental liberty.
Yes.
And I just wrote them down when you said them. And the reason I wrote them down is it just struck me that because so much of meditation is about mental liberty.
Mm.
And so I connected it. I started because of the meditations. And I'm a meditator, but mental liberty is definitely something to strive for. And
Yeah.
I never would have thought of that. I mean, I could go through all the things in my life that, the jobs I couldn't get or what people said, all that kind of stuff. Mental liberty, though, has a kind of nonviolent piece to it.
Well said. Yes. Well, and that phrase came from Robert Owen, who was Ernestine Rose's
Oh, right. I wrote that. Yeah.
someone she really looked up to, and she followed his leadership. And it's connected to free thinking. I think part of what's so interesting about this document and this period is the relationship between some of these ideas and whether they were grounded in religion, of like, these are God-given rights.
Right. For me, that's the most sacred part of it, mental liberty.
Yeah. And then others, I mean, what he's saying with mental liberty in some ways is like, let's not be bound by, what others tell you to think. And religion is often about conformity and having to, believe what other people are telling you. You should be able to be a free thinker. So we're seeing both of these things kind of interact with each other. These different ideas interact with each other in cool ways. Thanks for that, Rona. Okay, so we're going to keep going. I want to expose you all to the grievances if you haven't seen them and get your reactions to them. So let's take a look at that. Here we go. One moment. Let's see. Okay, I think we're back in business. Here we go. So, the history of mankind. I'm just going to add an editorial comment. I don't know if others of you noticed that the term mankind is used a whole bunch, and it feels a little ironic to me, but maybe also, historically revealing about just what words were so entrenched as not to be questioned even by a document like this. But okay, the history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward women, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. Having deprived her of this first right as a citizen, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation, he has oppressed her on all sides. He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right in property, even to the wages she earns. He has made her morally an irresponsible being, as she can commit many crimes with impunity, provided they be done in the presence of her husband. In the covenant of marriage, she is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming to all intents and purposes her master, the law giving him power to deprive her of her liberty and to administer chastisement. He has so framed the laws of divorce as to what shall be the proper causes of divorce, in the cases of separation, to whom the guardianship of the children shall be given, as to be wholly regardless of the happiness of women, the law in all cases going upon the false supposition of the supremacy of man, and giving all power into his hands. After depriving her of all rights as a married woman, if single and the owner of property, he has taxed her to support a government which recognizes her only when her property can be made profitable to it. He has monopolized nearly all the profitable employments, and from those she is permitted to follow, she receives but a scanty remuneration. He closes against her all the avenues to wealth and distinction, which he considers most honorable to himself. As a teacher of theology, medicine, or law, she is not known. He has denied her the facilities of obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. He allows her in church as well as state, but a subordinate position, claiming apostolic authority for her exclusion from the ministry, and with some exceptions, from any public participation in the affairs of the church. He has created a false public sentiment by giving to the world a different a different code of morals for men and women, by which moral delinquencies which exclude women from society are not only tolerated, but deemed of little account in man. He has usurped the prerogative of Jehovah himself, claiming it as his right to assign for her a sphere of action when that belongs to her conscience and her God. He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life. Now, in view of this entire disenfranchisement of one half of the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, in view of the unjust laws above mentioned, and because women do feel themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of these United States. In entering upon the great work before us, we anticipate no small amount of misconception, misrepresentation, and ridicule, but we shall use every instrumentality within our power to effect our object. We shall employ agents, circulate tracts, petition the state and national legislatures, and endeavor to enlist the pulpit and the press in our behalf. We hope this convention will be followed by a series of conventions embracing every part of this country. All right, so same question. As you've heard this second half of the declaration, I'm wondering what phrases, ideas jump out to you as particularly significant. I already see a few hands. Andrea, start us off.
So I was listening to this and thinking to, in addition to when I first started working in business, the concept that, well, if it's a man and a woman looking for the job, the man should get the job because, and then the one thing I was thinking about, which I had totally forgotten, in 1987, I bought my first place as a single woman. And very excitedly, I go to the signing of all the papers and stuff. And the lawyer starts looking at it and showing it to me. And it says, Andrea L. Gordon, a spinster.
No.
Pretty darn insulting. Fortunately, my lawyer said, excuse me, she's not a spinster. She's an unmarried woman. And I just find it interesting that that was in 1987. I haven't bought a place recently, so I don't know what it would say, but you damn well better believe I would speak up if it said that I was a spinster.
Wow, Andrea, thanks for sharing that. That is horrifying. Abby Snyder, let's hear from you. Help you get off mute.
There it is. I think that the beginning where it said where you were talking about mankind,
yeah,
is very appropriate because all of these sentiments are the male population, addressed to the male population. And an aside, I also, my first and practical and my only job that I had for many, many, many years, I applied for in the men's help wanted column, which I thought, you know, and thinking about it now, I think it's quite, I mean, nobody even knows what the men's help wanted column was in the New York Times. There were pages and pages, women's employment, men's employment. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was hired, obviously. So.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the pain of reviewing this history is that, I mean, tonight we will have a woman debating a man to potentially become the first female president.
Yes.
You know, 1840 and the musical Suffs, of course, also highlights that that long road. Helen, we're going to hear from you, and then I have an activity I want to invite everyone to do. Helen, go for it. Just got to get you off of mute. Okay, great.
Yeah. Hi. Well, the word mankind that they use, I wanted to speak to that. The fact that women then couldn't even conceive of using kind of a non-sexist term because the mankind was so ingrained in our psyche at the time, our brain, it wouldn't like compute, you know. And I remember when we started using those kind of terms, it was like, what? You can't be, you know, oh, how amusing, how stupid and insignificant, but it's not at all, because you can see here, even in the most extreme example of women trying to assert their authority, they're still using these sexist terms. It may not have even occurred to them what they were saying.
Exactly.
And the other thing that struck me was the moral delinquencies of men, you know, are of little account versus women who are held to this unbelievably strict moral standards. I mean, I think it's still true.
Yeah, yeah. So what I would like to do, I see there are a few other hands. I want to invite everyone to participate, because something that we have been trying to do in this series, and we've been, I would say, less than fully successful, we're going to try again today, is to invite everyone to choose a phrase that was part of what you heard and offer a comment about it in the chat, because we want to build a bit of a modern commentary around these texts that we've been studying. So for example, you might choose the phrase, made her morally an irresponsible being. I might say in response to that, in Judaism, to accept moral responsibility is to be God's partner on earth. So denying women the right to take responsibility is to deny her a relationship to the divine. That was just one thought that occurred to me. And just so you see where this is all going to go, we, just like with turn, a bunch of you shared various reflections on various pieces of the text with a comment. We were able to construct a Jewish-like commentary based on that text. And so we'd love to do so today. So I'm going to play some music now to give you all a chance to just collect your thoughts and share in the chat one section of the text that spoke to you and a thought about it, some reaction to it, some connection that you want to make that could be included in our shared commentary. So here's the music we're going to listen to before we close out.
You won't live to see the future that you fight for. Maybe no one gets to reach that perfect day. If the work is never over, then how do you keep marching anyway? Do you carry your banner as far as you can, rewriting the world with your imperfect pen, till the next stubborn girl picks it up in a picket line over and over again, and you join in the chorus of centuries chanting to her? The path will be twisted and risky and slow, but keep marching, keep marching. Will you fail or prevail? Well, you may never know, but keep marching, 'cause your ancestors are all the proof you need that progress is possible, not guaranteed. Keep marching on. 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 And remember every mother that you came from. Learn as much from our success as our mistakes. Don't forget you're merely one of many others on the journey every generation makes. We did not end in justice, and neither will you. But still we
right. So thank you all so much. For those of you who are sharing your thoughts, you can keep sharing them as I pass the baton to Marina, who will give us a little bit of final news and updates, including an event that is happening right after this one. Marina.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us yet again for another great American Sacred Text program. And thank you, Andrew, for all of this amazing background information. And I'm excited to read that book on Ernestine Rose. I'm going to borrow it from you. I'm going to put in the chat here some links. The first is, that should say September 20th. Register for Vote Forward Friday on September 20th. We've been gathering almost every other Friday before services to write letters to get out the vote to underrepresented voters. And we still have more letters to write, so please join us. And you can also write letters at home through our Vote Forward dashboard. And through postcarding. So after this session, after I close out all my announcements, you can join our neighborhood voting rights group for a half-hour postcarding social. So you can talk to each other about how much you've written, what you're writing to, and all of that information. If you are a Central member, I also encourage you to sign up for our Central Square Hineni civic engagement group, where I put additional resources, so certain things that we've talked about today in this session that are kind of like the extras. All of that can be accessed on Central Square. So if you have any questions about that, you can email me. My email is in the chat. And as we conclude, I just want to share all of the amazing work that our community has been doing to get out the vote and get civically engaged here, both at Central in person and all around the country. So we have now written, as of this morning, 10,707 letters and postcards to get out the vote. There are still days before the election that you can get active and engaged with us. So I please encourage you to do so through that Vote Forward event, as well as different engagement opportunities that you can learn about, again, through the Neighborhood Voting Rights Group and our Central Civic Engagement Group on Central Square, where we send weekly updates on like what you can do to get involved just nationally.